my words of caution for Hassan, you are in a very dangerous spot right now. Like, you're in a dangerous place, dude. You are all too comfortable with this kind of necro aesthetic of like this rotting, decaying. You're not willing to let go and learn from the failure, and you're just planting your feet in the ground and still blaming everyone else for the failure. Yeah, it's a really dangerous road to go down. You know, and Hassan says things sometimes that really do freak me out. Like, for example, when Hassan says like, I'm glad that people are dying from COVID who didn't get vaccinated or don't want to get the vaccine, that's really scary to me. I mean, I just find that really just... I don't know what's exactly happening, guys, but we're looking at a new Malthusian, eugenic, anti-human, anti-working class order that's going to emerge. It's just going to be an all-out war between liberals, technocrats, Bill Gates types, guarded by the kind of Antifa, ultra-left foot soldiers against like 75% of the population. It's going to be like 25% versus 75%. Maybe it's going to be even less. Maybe it's going to be 20 or 15% against 85%, right? I don't know the exact number, but we're looking at a dangerous situation of like a fascist 25% waging war on like 75% of the people, right? Yeah. Look, guys, what I'm saying sounds crazy now. But all you need to do is wait for the shocking moment. There's going to be a shocking moment. The Soviet people's demand for more access to these goods was not being fulfilled.
Yeah, they were demanding more goods, yes.
And the Soviet Union's
not
system...
necessarily the amount of resources existed for it.
So it's about physical... That sounds like a Malthusian argument.
I hate to break it to you and Caleb Maupin, but the world is finite, and the Soviets actually had a finite amount.
So you agree
because
with...
they weren't invading
you agree
countries
with,
like the United States.
So you agree with Malthus and not Marx, if I have you clear.
No. Sorry, that's... You're putting words in my mouth.
But that was Marx said the fundamental driving force of economies was not based on scarcity of resources, but was based on specific modes of production. Malthus was saying that it was based on the scarcity of resources. So you're saying the historical explanation...
I didn't say that the Soviet economy was based on scarcity. I said there was
You're
scarcity
saying the reason why they couldn't...
The world is finite.
I agree. The world is finite, but our ability to interact with the world is infinite.
X amount of steel, iron ore does exist in the world, and I don't know what you're saying. Will interact with it. So
yeah, I know, because you don't.
Ore?
You're just not very creative or aware of history.
No, I'm sorry.
You know, houses used to be built with mud and dirt, and some still are. Right?
I'm sorry. Exactly how is that supposed to make more iron ore?
Well, because you're making.
How is your idealism supposed to make more?
If you let me finish, I can explain.
If you say asteroids, I'm out.
The use for iron ore can be replaced by something else with the refined development of the forces of production. If it eventually we ran out of it, I can't see how we're going to run out of it in any decisive way anytime soon.
Okay, anytime soon, but yes, we will eventually run out of it.
By that time, we will probably have ascended to the 17th dimension or something. Like, that's nowhere near where we are now.
Okay, we replace it with another metal, and then when that metal runs out,
yeah, and that's history.
I'm not.
That's history.
I'm not arguing for degrowth. I don't get what it is that you're.
I just don't think you have a. You just don't have a correct understanding of history is the problem. And you know, this whole thing about the neoliberal austerity politics, this synthetic left, as you mentioned with cancel culture, perfectly supplements this logic that somehow as human beings, there's too much of us in the world. We're being in the world all a bit too much, and we have to kind of limit ourselves with political correctness, and we have to feel guilty about the fact that we like hamburgers, and we have to eat it's all this kind of it's kind of the same pathology, and it's a fundamental, deep-rooted Malthusianism, I think. That the synthetic left is especially is reinforcing. But I mean, at the level of government, it's self-evident that the neoliberal establishments and ideologists for decades and decades, despite all the failures that you're talking about, they were able to ignore that just because of how ideologically potent this idea that we need to feel guilty about our humanity. We have to, where there's too much of us in the world, we have to cut back. We have to always feel guilty. We can't have a sense of the realization of our latent potentials and power and the unleashing of the forces of production, so to speak. I think this corresponds, if I were to sum it up, to some type of objective decline of liberalism. And to me, this decline of liberalism has led it to some kind of state of self-contradiction.
And when you talk about Malthusianism, really what it gets down to is this, right? You got to imagine a game, right? A game of King of the Mountain, where every kid's trying to get to the top of the hill. So one kid gets to the top of the hill and he announces, "Oh, game over, I'm at the top of the hill." That's what Malthusianism is, right? The Western imperialists, they control the oil markets. That's their main way of dominating things, is with the oil markets, right? We have an oil-based economic order. So they're at the top of the hill, and they've announced, our fuel source, oil, that we happen to control, is polluting the world. So you know what? Human development has to end here while we're at the top of the mountain. We'll stay at the top of the mountain, and we'll stay on oil. We're going to keep an oil-based economy, but everyone needs to stop developing because we're at the top of the hill. And that's what's basically been announced. That's the Malthusian viewpoint, right? That there's just, human history must stop because we're ahead, right? We quit while you're ahead. Well, we're ahead. We're at the top. We're winning the game. So human history, game over, right? And what's particularly eerie about that is that it's just kind of a basic need of human beings to survive. Is human beings want to grow, right? Human beings want to expand. They want to have more than they had before. They want to work hard for something. They want to have a family. They want to have children. But when you introduce the Malthusian pessimism into the conversation and you say, well, we all have too much and we all need to be poorer, you're basically, with those words, you're basically trying to kill people. I mean, that's what depression is, the mental illness of depression, right? When people cannot go forward, they lose their will, their drive to go out and do things in the world. Their body just kind of shuts down. That is depression. That is what drives people to become suicidal. And so when they announce, every day, it's coming out of your cell phone, every day, out of your cell phone, out of your computer, the Malthusian, there is no future. There's too many people in the world. Human beings are a cancer. This stuff is actively killing people. It is toxic. It is poisonous. And look, the nature of humanity, human beings are tool makers. We're creative creatures. We have the ability to march forward and to advance. And because they're at the top, they've announced that we can't advance anymore. Look, climate change is a reality. I don't deny climate change. The answer to climate change is obviously getting off of fossil fuels. We need a higher fuel source. We need fusion energy. I mean, when Vladimir Putin called for international cooperation, China, Russia, and the United States to come together to get fusion energy like yesterday, that is what needs to be said. We need fusion energy. We need to get off of the trap of the oil markets and natural gas and all of that. We need to get into a higher mode of technology. Plus, we need to start, expanding into outer space. Look, China's already getting helium-3 from the moon. We need to figure out how to extract resources from Mars. We need to figure out how to not limit humanity to just this planet, right? I mean, we need to start exploring stuff. Before John F. Kennedy was killed, Kennedy was bad in a lot of ways, but before he was killed, a lot of people don't know this. He called for there to be a joint moon mission between the USA and the Soviet Union. Can you imagine that, right? And he wanted the Soviet Union and the United States to team up to go to the moon, not a space race, but a space cooperation. Imagine if something like that could be arranged today. That's the kind of thinking we need, right? We need progressive thinking, not this game over, economic pessimism, there is no future stuff. And, it's one thing in the first world to say, oh, we've got too much. I don't agree with that. I don't think we have too much. I think a lot of working families around here are suffering. But to go to people in Africa with a much lower life expectancy, who've never had running water and never had electricity, and say, oh, you need to stay poor because of Mother Earth. That is the height of, like, you want to talk about white privilege and arrogance. And I mean, it is pretty unbelievable. You can't hold back economic development. You can't. Human beings want more than they already have. They want to advance. And we're not in this to make people poor. I don't know where people got this notion. The memo was sent out. Communists want everyone to be poor because capitalism is people having a lot of stuff, and communists are against that, and they want to make everyone poor. That is not true at all, right? The goal of socialism is to build a world with so much prosperity and abundance that we don't need a government, right? That we can eventually get to a level of material abundance where all inequality can be broken down. The need for the state can go away. People can just kind of do what they need and take what they need and do what they want to do. And, from each according to his own ability to each according to his needs. That is the ultimate vision of Marxism, right? It is the height of progressivism, human progress, and the drive of human beings, what got us from, being hunter-gatherers living in caves to making iPhones and space travel. That is behind Marxism-Leninism. This is not a reactionary ideology. It's not a pessimistic ideology. It is about the human spirit and how human beings can conquer any challenge facing them. It believes that human beings can march forward and move ahead. That has always been what Marxism is about. What these people are pushing, this destructive, pessimistic, cancel culture stuff, this is not Marxism, I'll tell you that much. Now, in my book on Kamala Harris, I talked about the roots of it, right? And that, in a feudal society, right, people are very controlled. And the bourgeoisie, in order to bring down feudalism, they gave people permission to unleash their impulses toward anger, their impulses toward sexual release, right? And that the French Revolution was an explosion of sex and rage, right? The peasantry that had been very controlled were given permission to just, chop off people's heads and celebrate, but also permission to unleash their sexual desires. The Marquis de Sade was a big figure in the French Revolution. And that the bourgeoisie, in order to take power, they unleashed people's impulses, right? And Marxism came out of the aftermath of the bourgeois revolutions, the disappointment, right? That the bourgeois revolutions didn't create a just society, right? And so Marxism kind of held with it that belief that in order to bring down the old social order, we need to unleash impulses, unleash people's rage, etc. And that kind of the psychology of the bourgeois revolution kind of carried over. But right now, the capitalists, they're doing that, right? They're giving people permission to unleash their rage. They're giving people permission to unleash all their impulses and be as angry as they want and be destructive and all of that. Meanwhile, if you look at the strength of China, you look at the strength of countries around the world that are building socialism, it's not their ability to tell people to unleash their impulses that holds them together. It is the opposite. It's they give people a sense of community, a sense of purpose, a sense of joint effort, and almost that feeling that Sigmund Freud condemned, that feeling of religiousness and oneness with the universe, right? And if you look at what Stalin did during his 5-year plans, you look at what was achieved, in many countries, what Gaddafi did when he built the great man-made river, the biggest irrigation system in the world, right? It's about giving people a sense of community, giving people something to be part of, not just giving them permission to unleash their rage and their destructive impulses. I got into all of that in my book on Kamala Harris because it needs to be said. I talk about that in my City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, that we need to kind of rethink the psychology of what is it we're appealing to with Marxism. Are we just giving people permission to go out and break, or are we telling people that the capitalists have broken the world and we're going to start rebuilding it?
Yeah, I mean, I really like how you mentioned the whole the game of first one up the hill, and I actually think that also applies internally to the West as well. It's not an accident that the people who are pushing this whole cancel culture, fake wokeness and dumb political correct stuff, these are the elites that made it to the top. They are white people, and they're telling the rest of the white masses, oh, you have to feel bad and feel guilty, and well, that's quite convenient because you already made it to the top, and you're kind of securing your position against the majority of the people in your own country. So it's not just that they're telling other countries to do this, which they definitely are. It's also all connected, and I think an important thing for us is to be able to show concretely, make those connections between U.S. imperialism And this internal rule of this oligarchy, this deep state, and this institutionalized kind of professional, managerial, however we would call them, elites. It's interesting you mentioned the whole thing about the bourgeoisie as unleashing people's passion, so to speak. It's interesting because the utopian socialists like Fourier, I don't know if I'm kind of lost, Fourier, I believe specifically, talked about socialism in this way, as this kind of way of regulating these boundless and crazy types of, urges and passions and emotions in society. And you can kind of see how with the current American synthetic left, they're kind of going up that alley as well, where the main aesthetic behind them is really about, how to, it's a certain way of expressing yourself, not just in terms of having definite, concrete political positions, but this kind of cultural posturing and just a way for people to, way to people to channel their kind of urges. And I don't know, like, to what extent it would be appropriate to discuss this, but I don't know if you're familiar with how on Breadtube, a lot of these content creators, the way in which they interact with their own communities, on Discord and elsewhere, we kind of see a lot of predatory and disturbing behavior, So
it's that fear on the part of the British bankers and the American bankers and the American oil giants that if the Germans and the Russians get friendly to each other, that will cancel out their domination of Europe and eventually of Eurasia, right? I mean, they're afraid of seeing the Belt and Road and all the economic development projects that China is leading and that Russia is leading, and with the Eurasian Economic Union. They're afraid of seeing that spill into Europe. Could you imagine high-speed railway all throughout, Eurasia? Could you imagine what could be done, right, if Europe and Western Europe and Russia and China were to get together? And that is what they're afraid of. The world is slipping out of their fingers, and they know it, right? Their system has gotten to the point that it is on the brink of total collapse, right? And this is basic. Like, it bothers me that these Breadtube folks don't read Marxism. They want you to think about something different, because Marx talked about overproduction, right? That the capitalist is constantly trying to make production more efficient, eliminate people from the assembly line, hire as few people as possible, pay those who he does hire as little possible, so you de-skill the jobs, right? And the idea is make production as efficient as possible, as cheap as possible, churn out as many products as you possibly can, hire as few people, pay as little to do it. And the result is the worker, who is also the consumer, can't buy back the product he's producing, right? That's what happens, right? If you eliminate people's jobs, you drive down people's wages, eventually people can't buy the products that you're producing. And so you have a glut, and the market is full of products that can't be sold, and the economy collapses. And this is the built-in problem of capitalism. And this is why they created the Federal Reserve. I mean, this is why all the economic reforms they've invented have been carried out. They're trying to stabilize a naturally unstable system. The worker cannot buy back the product he produces. That's the problem of capitalism. And that's what's happening. The computer revolution has just expanded that problem beyond anything. Marx never envisioned self-driving cars. Marx never envisioned, Amazon, where a book is printed by a machine. No human labor involved in printing the book. The machine just churns out the book, right? 3D printers. I mean, their computer revolution has created such a situation where there's millions of people that have no place in their assembly line, and their system is coming to a grinding halt. Whereas in China, where the state controls the means of production, where the banks and the factories, the major industries are subject to a state central plan, and the lending of money and credit is in the hands of the state, this isn't a problem. And in fact, as technology advances in China, living standards advance, and people are getting wealthier while the economy is becoming more efficient. This contradiction between technology and human prosperity and abundance is eliminated, right? We can get more technology, and people can get wealthier at the same time. So their system has reached an impasse. The computer revolution is destroying capitalism. Meanwhile, the socialist countries of the world are able to deal with the computer revolution because profits are not in command. The state controls the means of production, not the irrationality of the market. So they're at an impasse, whereas the developing countries, the socialist countries of the world, are continuing to speed ahead. The way China handled the pandemic is another great example of that, and they're at an impasse, and I think they will become more warlike. I think it's weird,
But anyway, it's very strange in general how the meaning, even in America, of socialism and communism has changed. Now, in the past, the meaning of socialism and communism meant empowerment. It meant giving people dignity and something to be proud of. Today, the meaning of socialism appears to have been defined entirely by the right wing. But what we have with Breadtube and the synthetic left is that they're just going ahead and perversely adopting this caricature and straw man created by the right wing and embracing that. Oh, communism is for weaklings who hate humanity and are misanthropic and are pessimistic, and they, as you said, they want to kill, stifle people's creative energies, their livelihoods. They want you to be depressed and fear-mongering like Greta Thunberg about the end of the world and all this kind of stuff. And they just went, yeah, okay. So now I've kind of seen what the meaning of socialism and so-called communism in the American context has come to mean. It doesn't actually mean any authentic discovery of these ideas within the American context, or I should say rediscovery, because they do have precedent in American history. It rather consists in a way of perversely mocking and teasing conservative people. That's the conclusion I drew.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, I think about communism. I think about William Z. Foster and Gus Hall and Huey Newton and, the leaders of the Black Panther Party, Fred Hampton and others. Their message was that working people are oppressed by a system that puts profits over people, and that black and white should united fight, seize control of the economy, and build a society where working people and their needs come first, and human creativity and progress is no longer restrained. That's their message. But I listen to, the folks on Breadtube, and I'll criticize Bernie Sanders a little bit too. When people say, well, the understanding of socialism is, well, the government gives people free healthcare, the government gives people free education. I mean, I'm for that. I'm not against that. But in a way, they've taken this like very triumphant and heroic message, and they've replaced it with this give me some free stuff. That's kind of what I get from a lot of the message that I get from a lot of young socialists. Like, the world sucks. Give me some free stuff. Well, they deserve some free stuff. Corporations get free stuff all the time. They're not wrong, but like that is such a pessimistic way of looking at things. It's not inspiring. It's not heroic. And I do think that social media in a lot of ways has really weakened people, right? In China, they have found like kind of a balance where, that Marxism, Leninism, and Mao Zedong thought, and Confucianism and some of the aspects of Chinese civilization are able to kind of like have a synergy, right? They reject all the aspects of traditional Chinese culture rooted in feudalism, but they also celebrate a lot of the traditions of Chinese civilization while also embracing scientific Marxism, and that they can walk together, and that's the beauty of it. And that's really kind of what's amazing about Chinese socialism, is that they have been able to combine these things, right?
But one thing I would say is that I think we have kind of made it pretty clear that our mission is kind of to take down us. The Infrared Show. We do want to take down Breadtube, right? But as a kind of self-criticism, maybe something that's a little bit vague on our part is, what are we going to replace it with, right? I always look to you as an example, as an inspiration of somebody who does not only destroy, but is trying to build things, So I guess that's all I would say about that.
Sure. Well, one thing that people need to learn about this cancel culture stuff is you can never please these people, okay? So stop trying, right? No matter what you do. Look, ContraPoints, who's a huge breadtuber, right? She is a transgender breadtuber they think she's a transphobe. And like, you watch ContraPoints. I cannot think of anyone who's more outspoken for trans rights, is trans herself, but she did something wrong in a video sometimes. She's a transphobe. You can never make these people happy. But what feeds them is when people react to them and they go, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. And they play the game and they disavow whoever they're supposed to disavow. That is like, it's like feeding the monster. That whenever you do that, you're feeding the monster. So, and I'm at the point where I don't play that game, I mean, Jason on Ruhe, Maoist Rebel News or whatever, we don't agree on a lot, right? But somebody came onto my Twitter the other day and was like, oh, you should disavow Jason for this or that. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I said, get the hell out of here, right? We disagree on a lot of things, but I'm not going to disavow him. I don't play that game. I don't play that game. That's being a punk. That's being a coward. And you just gotta learn to be tough. And when someone comes to you and says, oh, disavow this person, disavow that person, say, no, I'm not going to play that game. I associate with people with whom I disagree. Maybe I'll argue with this person about this issue that I disagree with, but that's that. And that's that. I mean, and we gotta do that. It's a very middle class kind of thing. It's about appealing to middle class intellectuals and seeing working class people, oh, they're uneducated rabble. They didn't go to NYU and study gender studies like I did. Clearly you're misinformed. You must be one of those deplorables that voted for Trump. Get out of my way, you inferior. This is not a communist approach. This is not how Gus Hall and William Z. Foster and Joe Hill and Fred Hampton would have approached working class communities. You can have serious conversations and engage with people, or you can just feel good about yourself and dismiss them. There's one way that's the communist way, and there's one that is clearly the middle class, petty bourgeois, virtue signaling way. And I think we know which way is correct.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very suspicious. Why has this whole discourse about prostitution and all that, why has this become at the fore of the left? Well, maybe it has something to do with the fact that people are losing a sense of stable livelihood. Maybe it has to do with the fact that selling oneself has become the new moral virtue. I mean, not just in terms of prostitution, but people sell their souls, to these institutions that they're wedded to. It's extreme, and another really nefarious thing is, why are socialists the foremost of, not talking about the rights of people who have fallen victim to this trade, this sex trade. I'm just talking about as some fashionable, new. Why are socialists leading this? Because doesn't it only empower people who have money? I mean, it's kind of common sense. It's a sex trade. You're purchasing one of the defining things that makes us human, which defines human relationships. You're purchasing that with money. Who has money in our society? It's quite self-evident to me,
Why do culture wars always become the first thing? Right? Mm-hmm. Why does that, why is that always the first thing that pops out, right? The understanding, you go back to, in the communist movement, right? People always talked about how the Communist Party, with their anti-racist line, were able to win huge victories for the working class, black and white, right? That back in the 19-teens and the 1920s, when there was a strike, because most of the labor unions were whites only, the black community would be used as scab labor, right? And a lot of black people hated unions because unions kept them from getting jobs. If the plant was union, it was a union plant and you were black, you couldn't work there, right? And so a lot of black people hated unions, very, understandably so. And when there was a strike, the black people would all be hired as scabs, right? Well, the Communist Party came along and they said, let's get rid of that. Let's have anti-racist unions and let's make the demands of our strike that black people have the right to work on the docks in San Francisco or have the right to work in the auto plants in Detroit. We can break down racism. If the Communist Party back in the 1920s and 30s had gone to these unions of white workers and said to them, you all are racist, you're scum, you're racist, you deserve to be poor, the workers would have spit on them and told them to get out of there, right? But it was through helping the white workers to understand that putting the needs of the black community first was in their economic interest and would ultimately benefit all workers, that this came through. Look, the new left, the 1960s new left is very toxic, okay? Very wealthy people who are they see the white working class as a bunch of racist hillbillies and rednecks, and they see black people as just these victims who couldn't possibly fight for their own rights. But luckily, the rich white guy shows up to save the black people from the other evil whites. And that is such a toxic narrative. It's such a toxic narrative. And if the Communist Party had operated that way in the 30s, they never would have made any progress. They never would have won great victories, right? You look at what happened in the South when the Communist Party built interracial labor unions and got, white workers to rip up their Ku Klux Klan cards and join the Communist Party instead, and to stand arm in arm with black workers. It was a totally different approach. It wasn't about shaming. It wasn't about white privilege. It was instead about building solidarity and understanding that racism hurts all workers, most especially those who are victims of it, but even those who benefit from it slightly in the long term. They are hurt by racism. That racism and colonialism and white chauvinism hurt all working class people. And it should be on the agenda of the entire working class to eradicate these things.
The way I'd put it is that those who can afford to write people off and simply dismiss them, and of course those workers we're talking about who were in the Senate, of course you could say, yes, they do harbor racist tendencies. Yes, there is something racist about them. But you can only afford to write them off as racist when you can somehow find refuge in an establishment which represents a tiny minority of the population that has secured itself against the majority of the people. You can only afford to skip the part of actually winning the masses when you're taking refuge and hiding behind the dictatorship of some kind of elite. When all these fake leftists are going around dismissing all these people as racist and deplorables, what ground are they standing on to sustain that? They're standing behind the anti-democratic and anti-popular elites.
How many people are sitting at home watching this now are full of so much potential, right? They're ready to go out and work. They've got a degree, maybe they got student debt. They got so much they could go out and do, but because some capitalist can't make money from hiring them, they're stuck. And they're stuck, living a life where they're stuck in low-wage jobs. They feel useless. Their family's on their ass saying, hey, when are you going to get your life together? I mean, it's a tragedy, right? It's a tragedy what this system has done. Many young people are angry about it. And it seems like there's this big effort now to make sure that the only people that are able to capture that anger are the alt-right and white supremacists. That's basically what Breadtube is trying to do. They're trying to say that if you talk about economic suffering, you must be a Nazi, right? That's class reductionism, right? That's what they're trying to do. They're giving a huge gift, right? It's like there's millions of young people that are angry about economic issues, and Breadtube is saying, you know what? Richard Spencer and neo-Nazis, you can have them, right? And we're going to castigate and shame anyone in our movement who tries to actually address these issues. And we're just going to hand all those people to you. Here you go. It's a beautiful gift. Vosh, Skippy the Bear, Thought Slime, whatever you want to call him, right? What is this? The Surfer Kid, Surfing USA, whatever that loser is, right? These people are the best friend actual white supremacists and neo-Nazis ever had by making working class people that are angry and want economic justice basically feel like they don't belong in the socialist movement, to make socialism part of a war on working class people, not something mobilizing them to fight for their rights. That's a huge gift to actual Nazism and actual fascism. No question about it. Right? If I was Richard Spencer, if I was the white nationalists and white supremacists, I would be paying these clowns to be on there representing socialism. I mean, they are every caricature that the right makes about socialists and communists. That's not real socialism. Oh, you're a racist. People are racist, right? Obviously, but if you just call somebody a racist, right? If you just say you're racist, you haven't accomplished anything. Prove to them that they're a racist. Show them how their position is racist, right? Show them how they're wrong. But if you just call somebody a name, you've accomplished nothing, right? In the real world, if you just call somebody an ist or a phobe, you haven't accomplished anything. This cancel culture, it's juvenile, it's childish, it's thought stopping, it's trying to prevent people from really engaging with the issues that you and I talk about on our streams. That's what's going on. I've had it up to here with Breadtube, with Jacobin, with all these phonies, right? We need a government of action to fight for working families.
Yeah, that was really, you took the words right out of
Yeah,
Yeah,
and they're fighting with each other too. They all hate each other.
doesn't
Not just those of us. I mean,
surprise me.
they all hate each other. They throw mud at each other, and really, so much of what they do, so much cursing. And I mean, I'm okay. I'll drop an F-bomb every so often on this channel, on my channel, whatever. But so much cursing, so much talk about feces, so much talk about sex, so much talk about dirt and slime, and there's just, you get this gross feeling, right? I mean, it just, and the sad thing is, I mean, look at the suicide rate right now. I mean, so many young people are growing up, and they do feel like they're dirt, and they do feel like they're slime and all of that. And you listen to these people, and they're just hurling negativity, just endless amounts of negativity, personal attacks on other people, put downs against other people. And then they put forward this argument: there's too many people in the world. We need to degrow. We need to roll back the human population. We're all going to die from some big ecological catastrophe. The government is run by a bunch of secret Nazis. Did your parents vote for Trump? That means they're probably part of this secret Nazi conspiracy. And it's just this endless amount of negativity that comes out of these people. And I mean, it's like, are they doing good by putting this? I mean, it's like, on my streams, I do criticize capitalism. I criticize imperialism, but I am all about making people proud of who they are. I'm all about inspiring people and telling people to go out and fight for justice. That's why I became a socialist. I wanted to be part of creating a whole new world where we didn't have the chaos of the market and greed. We actually had a rational economy. Socialism for me has always been about optimism. It's always been constructive. And I'm really proud of the fact that I started to put on a suit. A communist is an upstanding citizen who loves their country and loves their community so much that they want to get rid of the greed of big corporations and put the people first and bring people into politics, expand democracy. That's what a communist really is. And it's not somebody sitting on the internet talking about the end of the world while they cuss up a storm. That kind of pessimistic view that we're heading towards some kind of great apocalypse, that is very prevalent among the Breadtube milieu. We are, having very, very big problems with climate change right now. I maintain the answer is progress, fusion energy, getting beyond fossil fuels, getting to a higher mode of energy, changing the way we interact with our environment. That's the answer. The answer is not degrowth, driving down living standards, reducing the population. We need to get away from Malthusian thinking. And actually understand that human beings are creative creatures. We're tool makers. And the way we solve things is by inventing new things. The first ecological crisis was about 6,000 or 7,000 years BC, when we got too good at hunting and gathering. We were killing animals with spears and rocks, and we were so good at hunting and gathering that there was a scarcity. So what did we do? Did we degrow? Did we just, did we stop hunting and gathering? I mean, no, we didn't degrow. We invented agriculture. Right? We started growing our own food and growing our own crops. And that's how we got beyond the first ecological crisis. Human beings have constantly changed the way they relate to their environment. And that's one of the big holes in some of this limited resources rhetoric we get, is that the whole history of human beings is changing the way we interact with our resources.